Are you sure you're in the right place? Excuse me, sir, but are you sure you've come to the right place? Waitress Morgan Reed, a slender blonde in a perfectly pressed uniform with a gold Legacy Room badge, stood at the bar, her thin eyebrows raised. Her voice was tight but polite. Almost. The man she was looking at looked like he had actually walked into the wrong door. Tom Hanks walked into the elite private club without attracting attention. With a familiar movement, he removed his cap, folded it into the pocket of his light gray sweater, and hung it over the back of a chair. He was dressed too casually for this place. Regular jeans, slightly worn sneakers, a modest sweater without logos. Against the backdrop of guests in Tom Ford jackets and dresses with deep slits, he looked odd, inappropriate, but there was absolute confidence in his manner. He walked up to the table by the window, sat down and looked around calmly. He took the menu. "Sir, can I help you?" Morgan's voice became more insistent. The client had no place here. She knew it. He knew it. The Legacy Room is not just a restaurant. It is the territory of the elite. The biggest deals were signed here. Presidents, Hollywood stars, IT magnates could be seen here. Nobody here ordered coffee with milk or satin jeans. But that's exactly what Tom Hanks did. "Black coffee, please." He didn't even look at her, looking at the heavy Murano glass chandeliers. Morgan clenched her fingers into fists. Customers didn't talk like that. Customers didn't order black coffee unless it was a 2,000 a pack blend flown in from Honduras on a private jet. This man clearly didn't understand where he was. She leaned closer. "Sir, I'm afraid we don't serve just coffee." Tom looked up, calm, tired. He smiled. "You'll be surprised, but coffee is still coffee." For a few seconds, she just looked at him, as if expecting a trick. Then her face changed slightly. Irritation. Morgan was the best waitress at the Legacy Room. She served real celebrities. She knew everyone who was important. And this one was nobody. She glanced at his simple clothes and chuckled softly. "Sir, perhaps you would be more comfortable downstairs. We have a staff cafe. They serve black coffee there." Several people around him stopped talking, sensing the tension. In the corner of the bar, Silicon Valley businessmen drank 12,000 a bottle whiskey and discussed a new deal. By the window, the model with millions of followers took a selfie with a silver cocktail, her manicured fingers clinging to the glass of liquid gold. Against this backdrop, the man in the old sneakers looked like he had been dragged out of a bus stop, but he just sat there, calmly holding his cup of coffee. "I'm fine, thank you." He said it so simply that Morgan felt a slight awkwardness for the first time. She felt her cheeks flush slightly. Why is he looking like that? Without irritation, without malice. It's like he feels sorry for her. "Sir, we do not accept tables," unless she swallowed quickly, choosing her words. "They are reserved for our regular customers." He didn't answer, just took a sip of coffee. She knew this type of man. The ones who didn't fit in. Workers who were sometimes brought in by the rich. Drivers, bodyguards, assistants. People who couldn't afford to dine here, but sometimes found themselves on the premises. Usually those understood. Usually those looked away. But he is not. Morgan exhaled sharply, angry at herself for her own confusion. And suddenly I heard a voice behind me. "Do you even know who you're telling this to?" She froze. At the next table sat an elderly gentleman in a formal suit. White hair, perfect posture, a look full of contempt. He knew this man. Everyone knew this man. It's quiet in the Legacy Room. Morgan turned her gaze to the man in front of her. "Are you someone famous?" Tom Hanks smiled. "What do you think?" He put the cup down and looked straight at her. Her breathing quickened. But her voice broke. She began to guess. God. Her hands went cold, and Tom Hanks slowly reached for the phone. Second, click. Call. "Dave, come here, please." It sounded so soft that it was even worse, because at that moment her world began to collapse. Morgan felt her heart hit her ribs. There was only one way to go wrong in the Legacy Room. "Dave, come here, please." Tom Hanks's voice sounded calm, almost casual, but there was a threat in this calm. At the neighboring tables, people froze. Silence covered the room like a thick fog. Morgan felt a cold lump in her stomach. Someone behind me loudly sucked in a breath, because everyone in this place knew the name Dave. Before Morgan could even blink, Dave Lawrence, the manager of the Legacy Room, emerged from the side door. Tall, gray-haired, with sharp features and a keen gaze. A man that even billionaires feared. Dave didn't walk fast. He moved like a predator with nowhere to rush. But now he walked quickly. "Sir, Mr. Hanks, I'm sorry for..." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Morgan standing there, pale as a ghost. He already understood. Oh my God, girl. What have you done? Tom Hanks put a cup of coffee on the table. He looked at Morgan as if he was looking right through her, and he asked quietly, when did appearance become more important than a person? Morgan tried to say something that would save her, but her tongue wouldn't obey. She just stood there, like a complete idiot. Mr. Hanks, But Tom didn't even look at her. He looked at Dave, and there was steel in that look. Tell me, Dave, if I walk in here with torn sneakers and a holey sweater, will I stop being your client too? The manager swallowed. Sir, of course not. This is a terrible misunderstanding. Tom leaned forward. Misunderstanding? The word stuck in the air like a bullet casing after a shot. Morgan began to realize that this was more than just a mistake. This is a disaster. She didn't just insult the client. She insulted Tom Hanks. And this means that her career in elite establishments is over. Forever. Dave nervously adjusted his tie. Morgan, he began, his voice cold as a knife blade. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. She looked at Tom. He drank coffee as if nothing had happened. That was the most terrible thing. He didn't need to shout. He just knew that everything had already been decided. I wouldn't want to lose faith in this place, Dave, Tom finally said. He leaned back in his chair, put his hands in the pockets of his sweater, and looked at the ceiling as if he were deep in thought. But if you here think that class is determined by the brands on clothes, then something went wrong. Dave nodded. I'll take care of everything, Mr. Hanks. His gaze pierced Morgan. She knew that look. This look meant collapse. Dave, please. She felt her legs giving way, but Dave wasn't listening anymore. He motioned to one of the employees. Escort Miss Reed to the exit. Everything started spinning around. No, this can't be true. She clutched the hem of her skirt like a drowning man clutching at his last hope. Mr. Hanks, please, I didn't know. But he just took another sip of coffee. That's exactly it. Please, Mr. Hanks. Morgan couldn't believe what was happening. Her words were lost in the noise of blood in her ears. She stood in the midst of absolute silence, and she knew she was finished. She will be kicked out, right now, in front of everyone. And they won't just kick you out, with shame. In the eyes of the guests at the Legacy Room, the most powerful people in New York, she was already dead. Her career in elite institutions, her reputation, her future, everything was shattered into pieces. I just thought that. She tried to justify herself, but Hanks didn't even look at her. He looked at Dave, and Dave understood without words. Morgan, his voice was icy. You? She caught a look of disgust. I am not leaving, she blurted out. It's not right. I work here. But she was no longer heard. She was a nobody. She lost power. Now she was on trial. Every glance in the room burned through her like a cigarette burn. Morgan, Dave said her name like a death sentence, and he nodded to the guard at the door. She turned around abruptly. Don't you dare! But the guard was already moving towards her. She turned pale. Throw out the waitress? In front of clients? This only happened to those who stole money. But it was worse. She knew she will be remembered as the one who dared to kick out Tom Hanks. She felt dozens of eyes on her, and in each of them there is contempt. And then he spoke. Leave her. Tom Hanks' voice sounded unexpectedly quiet, but so powerfully that the guard stopped halfway. Morgan exhaled sharply. She can still be saved. I don't want her to be thrown out, Tom continued, not looking at her. And he added, already looking straight at Dave. But I want her to understand what exactly she lost. Morgan held her breath. Hanks took another sip of coffee, put the cup down, and he said the main words of the evening. Let him see what it means to be a real client. And before anyone knew what was happening, he slowly took out a black leather briefcase, opened it, got the documents. I put them on the table. Everyone in the room held their breath. You know, Dave Hanks' voice was almost thoughtful. I've been thinking. He picked up the first sheet and passed it on to Dave. He read it, and he turned pale. His eyes twitched. He raised his head slowly. Mr. Hanks. But his voice betrayed him. He understood. Everyone understood. The document contained only one sentence. The official owner of the Legacy Room is Thomas Jeffrey Hanks. A ringing silence fell in the hall. No. It was Morgan who exhaled, but no one heard her, because everything fell into place. Tom is not just a client. He owns this place. He is the boss. Morgan froze. Her world collapsed. Every guest in the room was now looking at her. She humiliated the owner. She made a fool of him, and now he's judging her. Tom closed his briefcase. He stood up slowly. Now, Dave, cook me dinner. He turned to the waiter. Wakey, tell me, man, do you still have that amazing steak with black pepper sauce? The guy nodded nervously. Excellent. Bring it to me. He sat back down, and he smiled, as if nothing happened. But everyone knew the truth. He crushed her and left to live. And she was nothing now. Morgan stood rooted to the spot. My chest was heaving and my palms were sweating. She heard every sound in the room, the clink of spoons on porcelain, quiet whispers, the barely perceptible crackling of candles on the tables. But the loudest sound in her ears was that of her own pulse. She lost, in front of everyone. And the worst part is, it didn't even look like revenge. He didn't humiliate her. He just erased it. Tom Hanks sat at his desk as if nothing had happened. He was waiting for his steak with black pepper sauce, and she stood there, crushed, destroyed, unnecessary. Someone laughed. Crap. Not loudly, not openly, but that laughter was like a knife in the back. Morgan pressed her lips together, trying to save her face. I can work here, Mr. Hanks. Her voice shook. I can improve. She was ready for anything, but Tom didn't even raise his head. Coincidental, you don't have to apologize to me. What? She blinked. He drank his coffee calmly, and suddenly he looked straight at her. You should apologize to yourself. These words made her recoil, because they were true. She knew it herself, but the worst thing was that now everyone knew. The thin, invisible line between those who considered themselves elite and those who understood that the true elite was in respect, not money, was shattered into pieces, and she found herself on the other side of the barrier. She felt fingers poking her back. She felt like they were looking at her. Those who had recently smiled condescendingly at her now looked away so as not to fall into the same shameful whirlpool into which she herself had fallen. Money or respect? She knew the answer. She knew the truth, but it was already too late. At that moment, the waiter placed his perfectly cooked steak in front of Tom Hanks, and Morgan understood. She no longer belongs to this world. Morgan sat in the service room and stared into space. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was beating too fast. Here, behind the doors of the luxurious hall, where the quiet conversations of the elite could still be heard, she was already a nobody. Lost. But even now, she couldn't accept it. She was nobody. She worked for this status. She knew the Legacy Room's wine list by heart. She could tell the difference between truffle sauce and porcini mushroom sauce by smell. She knew to dress her burrata salad only with organic olive oil from Liguria, and now she no longer existed. She wasn't even officially fired. She just wasn't part of this world anymore. It's all over. But the worst thing was what happened next. In the hall, Tom Hanks was cutting his steak. Unhurriedly, as if time belonged to him. Around him, New York's elite froze. They didn't know how to behave. But the worst thing was that they knew the answer. Tom not only humiliated the waitress who dared to judge him, he destroyed the whole principle of this place. The principle of status. Someone was whispering. Someone was already pretending not to have seen what happened. But one man dared to speak up, in the center of the hall. Excuse me, Mr. Hanks. The voice was soft but confident. Tom raised his head. In front of him stood a man of about 40 in an expensive suit. Adam Langley, head of an investment fund, billionaire, and most importantly, one of the most influential people in this room. He smiled, but there was no warmth in his smile. You are a legend, Mr. Hanks. He paused to be noticed, but perhaps you have forgotten where you are. Tom put the knife and fork on the plate, looked straight into his eyes. The tension in the room increased. Everyone was waiting. And where do you think I am? Tom slowly wiped his lips with a napkin. Adam took a step closer. In a world where status is everything, here it is. Bare words, without hints, no false diplomacy, right in the forehead. Adam turned his palm and pointed at everyone around him. Look at these people, Mr. Hanks. A crowd of millionaires, bloggers, and company owners stood frozen in the hall. Everyone here is someone. He looked at him as if Tom were a guest at someone else's party. And you act as if status doesn't matter. Tom put the napkin on the table. Because he doesn't have one. Silence. Complete. Someone took a deep breath. Someone quickly put their phone away to avoid attention. Adam chuckled. That sounds beautiful, Mr. Hanks. He took another step closer. Now they were standing almost right next to each other. But the truth is that even here, in this room, you lack status. The words pierced the air. Someone couldn't help but gasp quietly. There was no fear or irritation in Tom's eyes. He just watched, and suddenly he smiled slowly. Status? He took his cup of coffee, slowly lifted her up, and took a sip. And then he put the cup back. The silence stretched out. And suddenly he said, "Boy." Everyone in the hall tensed up, but he wasn't looking at Adam. He looked at the young waiter who had just brought him dessert. The guy froze. "What is your name?" He wavered. Joshua, sir." "Nice name, Joshua." The guy nodded nervously. "Tell me, Joshua, who is your father?" "Father?" The waiter hesitated. "Well, yes, father. What does he do?" Joshua felt everyone's eyes on him. He worked as a car mechanic, sir, in the Bronx. But he's gone." Tom nodded. "Was he a good man?" The boy swallowed. "Yes, he always helped his neighbors for free if they didn't have money. He said that money comes and goes, but respect remains." Tom smiled. "And what's more important, Joshua? Status or respect?" The guy didn't know what to answer. He just blushed. "I think respect." Tom looked up at Adam. "Nah, that's all." There was absolute silence in the hall. Adam tensed. "What everything?" Tom stood up slowly. Now he looked down at him. "Everything you need to know." His voice was firm. "You can sit in this establishment for 1,000 years, drink the most expensive cognac, and wear suits worth hundreds of thousands." He leaned closer. "But you will never be respected." Adam turned pale. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. "You live in a world where status is everything." Tom took his cup. "And I live in a world where he means nothing." He finished his coffee, put the cup down, and he turned towards the exit. Adam didn't move. He was humiliated, in front of everyone. But Tom didn't stop. He stepped forward, came through the New York elite, and left them in that silence that spoke more than any words. Tom Hanks didn't turn around. He walked slowly, his steps echoing dully throughout the hall. Golden chandeliers, heavy glasses of champagne, expensive suits. All this was now just a background. He tore this reality apart. He crushed their illusion, and they knew it. But the one who couldn't accept it was still standing behind him. "Don't leave." Adam Langley's voice cut through the air like a knife. Everyone in the hall tensed up. Tom stopped, but he didn't turn around. "You're just leaving?" Adam's voice was almost nervous. "Just like that? After all this circus?" There was fury in his voice now, but something else too, something dangerous. Tom turned around. Their eyes met again. Adam didn't smile anymore. His eyes were cold. "Do you want to look noble, Mr. Hanks?" He slowly took out his phone. "But let's check how honest you are." And he turned the screen towards the hall. Tom saw, and I understood. There was a news app on the screen, the headline that just flashed. "Tom Hanks publicly humiliates staff at elite New York club." Someone in the hall gasped. Morgan clutched her mouth. Tom remained calm. Adam smiled. "Welcome to my world, Mr. Hanks." He swept his hand around the room. "Here, status is everything." He took a step forward. "Do you think you won? Made another one. But the truth is that now you will be remembered not as a Hollywood legend." He stopped right there. "And as an arrogant old man who considered himself better than others." There was a deathly silence in the hall. Tom didn't blink. "You know, Adam," his voice was quiet, "you don't even understand what you just did." Adam raised an eyebrow. "Is it true?" He turned the phone back to Tom. "I just made you viral." He clicked his finger on the screen. 5 million views in 10 minutes. Someone started whispering in the hall. 20 news channels are already writing articles. He chuckled. "And guess what, Mr. Hanks?" He leaned closer. No one will go into the details." Tom looked at him carefully. And suddenly, he smiled. But this smile was different. 20 channels. Adam froze. 5 million views? There was irony in his voice now. "Do you think I'm worried about my reputation?" Adam opened his mouth, but Tom got ahead of him. You don't understand who you're dealing with." He took a step forward. Now they stood nose to nose. "Do you think what the news sites write is true?" He looked straight into his eyes. "But the real truth is this." The whole room held its breath, and Tom said calmly, "I do not depend on your world." Adam turned pale. But Tom didn't let him finish. "I don't live by your rules." He leaned forward slowly. "But you live." Adam felt a lump rise in his throat. Tom slowly raised his hand, and he snapped his fingers. The click echoed throughout the hall. The doors swung open. People entered the hall. They were dressed simply, but everyone knew their face. Media. They kept their cameras ready. Adam turned even paler. What? Tom smiled. You gave me 5 million views? He leaned closer. And I just gave you the whole world. Adam flinched. Tom turned to face the reporters. All cameras were pointed at him. He calmly raised his hand, and he pointed at Adam. Here he is. A loud whisper rolled through the hall. A man who thinks that respect can be bought. The cameras clicked. Adam lost his voice. His face contorted in horror. Aye, this is a lie. But now they didn't listen to him. Tom turned around slowly, and he went to the exit. Behind him, the room exploded into chaos. But he didn't care. He left them in their world, the world he just destroyed. Tom Hanks was in no hurry. He stepped over the threshold of the legacy room, feeling dozens of eyes on him, but he didn't even slow down. It hadn't started raining outside yet, but the air was already heavy and damp. Usually evenings like this in New York make you think, but not today. Today he knew he had done the right thing, and yet he felt that this was not the end. He ran his hand over his face, took his phone out of his sweater pocket and looked at the screen. 0 notifications. Silence. And this is what made him wary. Behind him, the noise in the club grew louder. The reporters were spreading the word, and inside, no doubt, Adam Langley was trying to digest what had happened. But why is it so quiet in the media? Why doesn't he see any messages from his people? Why is no one calling? And then the phone vibrated in his hand, number without a name. Tom took a deep breath, and he answered. Speak. There were a few seconds of silence on the other end, and then the voice, calm, smooth, but with a hint of that same coldness that he would recognize at any time. Do you think it's all over, Tom? He recognized that voice, and his fingers tightened on the phone. You left the room too quickly, the voice chuckled. Now you will watch the news. Tom remained silent, but with his free hand he unlocked the screen, and I saw. Shock! Tom Hanks publicly attacked investor Adam Langley, humiliated staff and threatened journalists. Scandal is gaining momentum. Footage, filmed in a way that suited them, his face frozen in a serious expression. The shot where he says, here he is, and then editing, sinister, smart, precise. He was made out to be a monster. Tom took a slow breath. I hoped you wouldn't stoop so low, Adam. The voice on the other end laughed. You said it yourself, Tom. I live in a world where status is everything. Click. Adam hung up. Tom was left outside. The cold air stung my skin. He looked at the phone, then to the skyscrapers of New York, and then made a call again. That one call that will change everything. Tom Hanks wasted no time. He stood on the sidewalk in the bustle of New York City at night, holding the phone to his ear. Taxis sped by, people walked quickly, oblivious to him. But he knew that in a couple of hours his face would be on every screen on these same streets. Lies, falsifications, manipulations. They decided to destroy him. But if Adam Langley thought he was going to just watch his reputation get torn apart, he was sorely mistaken. I'm listening. The voice on the other end was clear and collected. It's time, Dan. Get out the papers. There's a short pause on the other end. You are sure? Tom raised his head to the sky. Drops of rain were already falling on his face. Absolutely. Inside the legacy room, the noise did not subside. Everyone was discussing what had just happened. Adam Langley stood in the center of the room, his face still tense. Yes, he won this round. Yeah, he put Hanks in the corner. Now, there are dozens of articles circulating on the internet about how the Hollywood darling showed his true face, but he didn't feel victorious. Something was wrong. Mr. Langley, one of his men approached him. You must see this. Adam picked up his phone and saw the message. Breaking news. Changes in ownership at the legacy room. He didn't understand right away, and then I read on. Tom Hanks has bought a controlling stake in the legacy room. An official announcement is expected within the next hour. His heart sank. What? At that moment, the doors of the hall swung open, and in walked Tom Hanks, slowly, calmly. No more than 20 minutes had passed since he left the hall, but now he's back, and the whole hall froze. Adam couldn't believe his eyes. This is impossible. Tom walked through the room like a man who owned every inch of the place, and because now it was so, he stopped in front of Langley. He took a thin folder with documents out of his pocket and handed it to him. Do you want to read? Adam tore open the folder. He scanned the pages. His hands began to tremble. Every word hit him like a hammer. Tom Hanks now owned the place. Fully, and that meant you. Adam felt his throat tighten. You're my boss now? Tom smiled. You're wrong. Adam blinked. What? Tom didn't look away. I'm not your boss, Adam. He took a step back. The whole room was looking only at them. You're fired. Instant. Pause. And Langley's world collapsed. He couldn't breathe. I couldn't believe it. You can't. Tom walked over to the bar. He raised his glass of water, took a sip, and he said, I just did it. A roar of voices erupted in the hall. The journalists who were still inside rushed to the telephone. This news has already spread throughout the world. Adam sank into the nearest chair. He was destroyed. Just now he was the arbiter of destinies, and now he is nobody. Tom looked around the room, and he said the last phrase, which put an end to this story. Well, gentlemen, who will tell me now that I lack status? Silence filled the room. Everyone looked at Tom Hanks, who had just destroyed Adam Langley's world. The one who had recently dominated here now sat devastated, staring at the papers that crossed out all his power. But that wasn't the end. Because the end now had to be chosen by Langley himself. He can leave, or he can try to save himself. Adam took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists. He slowly rose to his feet. His eyes were flashing, but it was not anger that drove him at that moment. Despair. He turned his gaze to the people in the hall. Those same rich, influential people whose approval used to mean everything to him. And what did he see? Cold, indifference. They no longer looked at him as an equal. There was no turning back for him. But then why is Tom still here? Why doesn't he leave? Adam swallowed his pride. What now? His voice was hoarse but firm. Tom looked at him, slowly, and there was no triumph in his eyes. Now it's up to you. Adam tensed, deciding what? Tom leaned forward. You can leave. Pause. Or you can stay. Langley blinked. He expected anything but this. Stay? Tom nodded, but not on the same terms. Now the hall was buzzing. Someone choked on a glass of wine. Are you offering him a job? Someone in the crowd couldn't help but ask. Langley was in shock. For what? Tom leaned closer, and he said quietly but clearly, to check who you really are. Langley felt a cold sweat break out on him. Are you putting me to the test? I'm giving you a chance to become human. The hall froze. Langley clenched his jaw. He could have walked away with his head held high. He could find other people who would want to save him. But now here, in front of everyone, he felt something strange, something new for myself. He realized that he was afraid. No loss of money, no loss of power, and loss of respect. What do I have to do? Langley's voice sounded muffled. Tom smiled. Start small. He made a sign to the waiter. He came up quickly, not understanding what was happening. Tom took the tray from his hands, and he handed it to Adam Langley. Bring coffee to table number 10. Gasps were heard in the hall. Langley turned white. What? Tom just looked at him. Show that you can respect others, not just yourself. Langley felt like his whole world was falling apart. He held a tray with cups of coffee. All the elite of New York looked at him. His hands were shaking, but Tom had already turned away from him. It was as if Langley had already made his choice, and at that moment he understood. He actually had a choice. Either he will leave now and remain a nobody, or he will prove that he is capable of change. And then he did what he didn't expect from himself. He went to table 10 and put the coffee on. A storm started in the hall. This is crazy. How is this possible? He really did it. But Tom wasn't looking. He knew the answer. Now it was all up to Adam Langley. Adam Langley placed the tray on table 10. The cups of coffee shook in his hands. He used to hold billions in his hands, but now he holds porcelain cups. The hall froze. Someone was whispering. Some people took out their phones, and some simply looked with disdain. Langley felt a cold sweat on the back of his neck. He heard every sound. Oh my God, is this really happening? This man once ruled the market, and now he's delivering coffee? This is humiliation. He doesn't belong here. But the worst thing was the silence. Tom Hanks watched, without judging, without gloating. I was just watching to see what would happen next. Langley straightened up slowly. He felt naked, broken, nobody. But then someone took the cup. Thank you. Langley's head snapped up. A gray-haired man in an expensive suit sat in front of him. Serious face, confident look. It was George Freeman, one of New York's largest real estate developers. He took the cup without blinking. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Langley. And suddenly, someone else took the cup. It's nice to see a person who knows how to take on challenges. And one more. You surprised me, Adam. In a good way. Langley didn't understand what was happening. These people, those who should have despised him, They respected him, not for money, not for power, and because he didn't run away. He took a deep breath, for the first time in many years. And then he turned and looked at Tom. He was still sitting, calmly, confidently. Langley understood. It wasn't a humiliation. It was a salvation. He nodded, slowly, and Tom responded in kind. That evening at the Legacy Room, everything changed. Those who thought status was the only thing that mattered saw the truth. True class is not about money, not Gucci suits, not closed clubs, inexpensive glasses with a gold rim. Real class is how you treat people. Tom stood up. I walked up to the bar, asked for another coffee. The bartender poured. Tom raised his cup, and he said only one phrase, "For respect." The audience watched in silence, and then someone applauded. Another, more, and now the whole hall stood up. Adam Langley stood in the center. Now he was a different person, and Tom Hanks turned around and walked away. He did what he had to do, and it was right.